Well, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to episode 3 of Founder Loveline. This event series is modeled off of Dr. Drew's radio show, Loveline. So the series is really intended to answer all of your burning questions, featuring tech leaders who have been in your shoes and really get it. So we want to humanize the entrepreneurship experience, creating a community of founders that can build side by side with proactive tools, frameworks, and share tactical knowledge. So we're so happy to have you on, Vlad. Today is all about founder empowerment during the fundraising process. And Vlad brings a tremendous vantage point in his experience working at 4 different firms. He's a founder himself. He's been on both sides of the fundraising process as a VC and a founder. He's published a book called When They Win, You Win, a more human approach to supporting entrepreneurship, which I haven't read, but I will. So wanted to jump in. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. So, Vlad, you have an amazing background for having a perspective on right now. The fundraising environment is really hard. I think a lot of early stage founders are really, especially if it's their first time fundraising, they don't know exactly what to expect, how to have empowerment on their side, how to advocate for themselves from someone who has experience on both sides and has raised multiple times. How has this perspective changed the way you view fundraising from the viewpoint of a founder?
It's a great question. And I think how my perspective has changed over the years, specifically from the investor side, because at that point you get the chance to just have more swings at the bat. I think that's the American expression for it. I promised myself not to use American expression, and here I am. You just get the chance to see this process many more times than as a founder. And you have a information asymmetry that gives you an advantage over this. And I think a lot of founders are caught off guard by the speed of fundraising pitches, specifically the speed of questions and the depth of those questions that may not really be ready to tackle them. And I think overall, looking at the fundraising, let's say, ecosystem over the past few months, maybe even just the whole year, I think going quite crazy, fewer deals being done, and the barrier to get funded being significantly higher. The questions also got a lot tougher. And I think founders who have not spent the time to properly prepare and deeply understand their business, if they were having a hard time to raise last year, they're just going to have a harder time to raise this year. And overall, my perspective through fundraising has really been prepare. And I think it's even more true this year than any other year prior.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What is something that you think founders can do to prepare?
It's just really taking the time to ask difficult questions about their business. I think as a founder, we have incredibly limited amount of time, and we're guilty of that as well, right? I mean, I've been now a full-time founder for 6 months, and there's so many competing directions that are now vying for your attention, and you're trying to figure out what else could you do to move the business a little bit more forward, and sometimes taking a 4-hour block of time to really dive for a potential 50 questions that you may be asked and create thoughtful answers to those questions, and actually have a conversations with your founders on what's our distribution strategy, how are we planning to do our go-to-market, what if this fails, what is unique about us that we're able to achieve this versus someone else who doesn't have the same background or set of expertise. How is this going to be defensible a year from now? Do we have the right toolkits and tools in place to make this happen? Things that you would have to find an answer to, and you shouldn't find the answer as you're being asked that question, in a pitch meeting, because you only have, people say 30 minutes to make an impact. You really only have 10, which are the first 10, where the first impression really matters the most. And after that, when you're in back-to-back pitch meetings from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., you're going to zone out after the first 15 minutes when the founder just is completely on the wrong track. And count the minutes for that meeting to end, say thank you, be polite, send a pass email, and then move on to the next founder. And just the reality of seeing a lot of deals on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that founders who haven't raised don't understand is you maybe have this 30-minute meeting, but you have 8 to 10 minutes to make your pitch. The rest is for questions. And so you really need to be prepared.
Absolutely.
On the preparation note, how can founders prepare in terms of practicing their pitch? I mean, building their founder or investor pipeline of, maybe doing a bunch of meetings with investors probably won't invest, and maybe just get that practice. Is that something that you would recommend, or how do you view that process?
Yeah, and I think that's great advice on finding people that are in the industry and would be willing to provide some feedback. And, some people may have the pushback, well, I don't know anybody in VC who would be able to provide some feedback. And I would say to that, well, that's a problem. You should get a chance to meet at least a few. You're definitely not yet ready to kickstart your fundraising process. So once you do and develop some of these relationships with at least a few people who are friendly, and these could be associates, senior associates, principals, they don't have to be partners, right? Because most of the diligence work is really done by non-partners. You're going to spend a lot of time with them. They would have seen thousands and thousands of pitches that can actually provide tactical feedback on improving your presentation, even the younger ones, right? Like, don't be afraid that someone is young and may not have the industry expertise. They may have the pitch expertise and still be significantly better telling a story than you are. So I would start there, building some of this relationship, going over your pitch several times. And really the most important part are the first, let's call it 2-3 minutes, which is trying to explain what you do. I cannot tell you how many times I've had founders who just went on and on and on, and 15 minutes later, I'm like, I have absolutely no clue what you're doing. I'm trying to paint a picture of what you're doing, but I'm still completely lost. Because as founders, you're really, in love with your product and what you're building, and investors are not. You try to get them there. And sometimes the best person to pitch is not an investor, is someone who is maybe a friend, has absolutely no clue what you're doing, is not in your industry. And if they have a hard time understanding, go back to the drawing board and make them understand.
Yeah, it's amazing that's still, that in this day and age, founders can still get meetings and go down these rabbit holes. It's like the preparation is so important. If you're not, sure, we can say 8 to 10 minutes, but it's like within a minute, if there's not that check, that vibe check of like, how to articulate your founder conviction, how to articulate your company, right? You're going to be dismissed, and frankly, everyone's time, our individual time is our most precious commodity. So you really have to be intentional around how you're presenting yourself in those environments.
Absolutely. And you sort of have to let your ego at the door in a way. Yeah. Like, there is no business too complicated to be simplified. Like, we've seen, right, like quantum computing, deep tech companies that were able to articulate what they're doing at a very high level in 30 seconds. And I've seen a consumer savings app that took 15 minutes, and I still wasn't completely sure, how are you delivering this product? Who is it targeted for? What you're really doing? Is there any differentiator whatsoever? Because people fall in love with how sophisticated their idea is, and don't see the fact that the other person has no clue what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think the iteration process, right? Getting that direct feedback, getting that hard feedback, and saying, "Stop! You have to rethink how you're pitching this idea. You're going to lose your audience, right?" And I think it's so important in the founder empowerment process of like, it's difficult, right? But the best feedback you can get are the ones that are like, "You're not ready. Here's if you go back to the drawing board and come back. Okay, you're a step closer, but here's the feedback," right? And it's just this iterative process as we are, we describe our personal narrative, who we are, and then what our company is doing. And I can't stress the importance of that enough. And if it's a mentor, if it's an advisor, if it's an accelerator that you're in, it's like really leveraging your network to say, poke holes, tell me where this is going to kind of lose the audience and where I'm not going to get that second meeting, like poke the holes. So yeah, I think it's a huge aspect to the preparation.
Absolutely. And it's hard. So it's going to take time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, the advice of finding, not necessarily partners is really smart, because like Danielle was saying, part of the reason we started this show is to get a lot of information to founders who aren't necessarily in these tech hubs and aren't getting this feedback really fast. You go to events in San Francisco, there's 50 in one night, and you might have your elevator pitch down and you might talk to 3 or 4 investors and they'd be like, that's a bad idea, or that's not the way you should be pitching this. You get that feedback instantaneously. You can go back that night and keep going and changing. And if you're not getting that feedback, or you don't have access to that, finding a way to get that feedback quicker is going to help you fail faster and succeed. And I think some founders maybe are afraid of that feedback, but it's actually ultimately going to help them. So I think that point of, associates and principals, people who are seeing that deal flow over and over and over versus you who are really focused on your product, you're going to be able to get a different perspective.
Absolutely. And I would say non-partners are seeing more of the bad stuff than the partners, because partners only see the filtered things that get to the partner level. So if your pitch falls into the bad category, they'll have a lot of notes to compare and give you that honest feedback.
Big time. Yeah, and I feel like, there's the emphasis, it's a little bit of like the soft skills component, right? Of like how to present yourself and confidence and self-worth and conviction and all of these things. And the delivery of that story. And oftentimes, I do this exercise where like they'll pitch me and I'll pitch them back. And it's hard, right? It's hard for us to talk about ourselves and our businesses. But if you're talking to someone who understands truly what you're doing and be able to re-articulate it in a way, it can just give you, another level. And it's like, it's practice, right? It's kind of embodying that future state presently. So, Vlad, I wanted to talk a little bit about, so we're like talking about, the CEO founder mindset, the preparations involved, the pitch prep, all of that. I want to talk a little bit about the tech stack and kind of going through that process of building your pipeline of investors. And there's so many tools and things out there. I know Flowlie has really been solving that problem for a bit. So I'm just curious your perspective on like best practices for tools and frameworks to use in kind of the pipeline management of fundraising and kind of how you see, what's emerging in that landscape and what are some of the challenges?
Great question. Definitely something up my alley, something I'm very passionate about lately, to say the least. But there's a lot of stuff out there for founders. And I think sometimes that may be confusing. We have that, analysis paralysis when there's just so many things to choose from. But the most important thing is to make a choice and stick with something and be able to run a process around fundraising. Anecdotally, and sort of a parenthesis to the tech stack, I've seen people with expertise in sales understand this much quicker and much better than founders without previous expertise in sales, because they're, let's say, they have experience in running certain processes, on running a CRM, understanding the idea of the top of funnel, understanding a sequence and the number of different touch points you need to be in front of a prospect, which in this case is an investor. And they understand the need to have certain tool to track certain parts of the process for you to improve. Whereas some founders who may have never fundraised before and unfortunately don't have the sales expertise may approach fundraising as a thing that just happens. And those are the founders who end up fundraising for 8, 9, 10, 12 months because they're unable to try to focus their attention and all their efforts over the period of, let's say, 2 to 3 months and actually get the stuff done. So with that being said, some of the key components of the fundraising stack, I would probably break them into 3 pieces. Number 1 is investor data. Think of it as investor databases. There's a number of those out there. Actually, this morning, we just launched our own, which we believe just has higher quality data for a specific set of investors. My advice is not just to use the Flowlie one, it's actually to go and search through multiple databases, create as large of a top of funnel as possible with people who are the highest fit for you. We do this natively using our AI algorithms. Some other databases may have filters. Try to narrow down the people who have the highest likelihood of being interested in you. The second piece to it is the CRM function. There's a lot of variety of CRMs there. You can build a pretty scrappy one in, let's say, an Airtable. Please don't go with a Google Sheets because they're not built for this type of thing. But as a last resort, do something like that. Keep track of the people you want to reach out to, your target list of investors, and try to optimize for as many warm introductions as possible. What I would do, I would create a version of that target list and send it to my advisors and say, hey, here are 100 people that I'm planning to reach out to. Who do you know? Can I put your name down for some of those people? And do that preparation up until when it's go time. And that's when you try to activate as many people at the same time as possible. Because if you're trying to have 30 conversations in 1 week, it's significantly higher chance of success than having 3 conversations over the course of 10 weeks. You're just not creating that momentum in your fundraise, which is why keeping track of the CRM and the pipeline is important, because otherwise, how on earth are you going to quantify momentum? The third piece, which is really important, track engagement with your fundraising materials. This is also something that we do at Flowlie, where we share, you're able to send your one-pager and your deck and track people who are accessing it. Probably people are familiar with other tools that are similar, like DocSend or BriefLink. Again, each one has their pros and cons, but make sure you're using some. Obviously, I love if you're using Flowlie, but that's not a requirement, rather than sending your PDF. The reason behind it is because if you don't have some form of email tracking in place and document access tracking in place, you won't even know what information the other person has, and you won't know who to follow up to, when to follow up. Do they need multiple touch points because they've never even seen your first email or your deck? You're operating blindly. So tracking of engagement, tracking of the process, and as many resources as possible to increase your top of funnel. In this way, you're going to have the most investors able to look at you. You're going to know if they looked at it, and you're going to be able to know when to follow up and with who.
Beautiful. I think those are really, really strong pillars to focus in on. And as we all know, fundraising is a full-time effort, but to have some of that structure in place, I think really fuels, to your point, the momentum that's necessary to shorten the amount of time that we have to, do the effort. So I'm curious, if there's correlations that you've seen of founders who have really nailed that process as it relates to them being able to close rounds faster, or just being able to get the feedback faster to then iterate into the deck, into your follow-up process, whatever that might be. Because there's seasons, there's these windows of time that we have for fund, and if not, you're often waiting a couple of months before you can do it again. So just curious if you have any correlations to that.
Absolutely. There's a lot of anecdotal knowledge that's been gathered over the past years of people who actually run a process and people who don't. And also as investor, I've helped founders put the round together, right? So not just deciding if we're going to invest or not, but also helping them after we invest, or even if we don't invest, get connected to the right people and try to teach them how to run a proper process for the ones who are raising the first time. And I've seen a night and day difference between the ones who do and the ones who don't. As I mentioned earlier, probably one of the best predictors is your ability to do a lot of preparation and then attack at once, rather than allow it to drag for too long. The longer a round drags along, the less likely it is to close. And again, it may be anecdotal knowledge. I don't know if we have hard data on it, but I've seen it enough times to see the patterns. At Flowlie, we're actually trying to develop some of these metrics in-house and hope that, let's say by the end of next year, we'll be able to come with some reports on that for each quarter, because we're tracking a lot of these statistics for our users. And we're very interested in that as well, because we believe fundraising can be processized and improved, but only if you track the right metrics.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That'll be really interesting to see.
We'll have to do another version of this episode to review that data next year.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Go ahead, Ellie.
No, I was gonna kind of just double tap on some of the other pitfalls that founders run into on their first or second fundraise, and things maybe you learned yourself that you can share. Of maybe something that you did that you were like, I'm not going to do that in my next fundraise, or like that didn't really work out. Because it's always really helpful to learn from your own experiences. And this is a episode of transparency, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do believe very much in transparency in this, because we don't have enough of these conversations. Anecdotally, we also run a podcast called The Fundraising Debrief, where we interview founders who've recently raised a pre-seed, seed, or Series A round and try to demystify the TechCrunch article behind it. the whole pitch of the podcast is not TechCrunch. Let's actually discuss of how this round actually came together, rather than, it came together overnight and, 50 people invested and we were oversubscribed in, 24 hours. And what we're trying to do there as well is just, unveil this mysticism. So more than happy to be transparent on these things that we've done and we shouldn't have done. Recap on the story and being succinct and understanding what you're telling. Even with our expertise, and we're 3 founders, 2 of us are ex-VCs, and all 3 of us have been active angel investors, it's hard. It's really, really hard to be able to be precise, succinct, and clear about what you're building in a way that resonates with someone who doesn't know anything about your industry or business model. We fell into that trap a lot, and it took us maybe a month and a half, not necessarily in the round, but also before the round, to really get to a point where, like, yeah, we can, I think, explain what we're doing easily. Second was asking for introductions from investors who passed. We were originally thinking that, any warm introduction is a good warm introduction. We realized very early on that that's a dead end, and getting someone who could have invested but didn't to introduce you to someone else, you're starting off the relationship on a bad foot. And, it's hurting you more than helping you. That's probably the biggest one that we've learned during this fundraise. And in retrospect, it sounds obvious, but in the moment, it's not. And third would be never run out of top of funnel. That goes into sales, fundraising of any sorts. Whenever you see that some conversations are not going anywhere for a particular reason, add more to your top of funnel. Never expect whatever you start with to be, whatever set in stone, and then things are just going to drip to the bottom of the pyramid and you're going to have the close. Evaluate, let's say, every week or every other week. Do I have enough top of funnel at the current conversion rate? Obviously, you're going to try to improve the conversion rate based on everything that we've been discussing in this episode and practicing your pitch and creating a more compelling story. But don't count on conversion rates improving without top of funnel ever being expanded. That would be number 3. And let me see if there would be a number 4 of things that we take detailed notes. I think we started doing a great job of that towards the second half of our fundraise. We were taking okay notes in the beginning and set time aside to review them. It's not just, the act of note taking in the moment that it's like, oh, sure, now you have pages and pages of stuff. Every week, review that with your team, understand what are the key questions people are asking, formulate better responses to that, and be better next week. Because otherwise, you're just going to get another week with the exact same skill set that you had in the first week. And some of the best founders that I saw on the investor side were always taking notes in the meetings with every single question that you ask. Because you can create a question bank at the end of the day and say, hey, these are the things we need great answers for.
Yeah,
Hopefully it helps.
Those are really, really great highlights and things that I wish I did a better job of as well. So thank you for sharing those. Documentation is absolutely key. Top of funnel, like, don't get complacent. Like, It's not closed until it's closed. Keep building top of funnel, get as many warm intros. I'm curious your take, Vlad, on, like, we all know warm is better than cold, but, like, what are your thoughts on cold outreach?
It still works. It just has to be personalized. It has to be to the right people. It has to be with the right message. It can be spam. I think a lot of people are equating cold outreach with spam when they shouldn't. I think in general, right, like the way our society has shifted over the past 5 years, emails have been garbage can, unfortunately, with more and more email automators of any sorts, from sales to marketing to promotions to pure spam to fundraising to anything. And people now have a very high spam filter mentally when they look at stuff. That just increases the bar of the quality of the emails that you should write and the people you're supposed to be targeting. Similar to sales, know your audience and only reach out if you believe there is potential for transactions, and people will take a look at it. do the email tracking, which we were discussing earlier, to know if they looked at it, because sometimes they haven't opened the email and you're saying, oh, they're not interested, when in reality it was just got buried into 300 other emails they received that week. Follow up until you get a response, and be very clear on what you're asking. You're asking for a 15-minute meeting to review the opportunity. Give them the information that they need, a deck, a one-pager, a flow link, whatever that is, so they can do the research and come back to you. And even saying that email, which is something that I've seen quite a number of founders do, if this is not interesting or a fit to you, just give me a quick note so I can take a note of that. Perfectly fine. Get that quick note, understand it's not a fit, focus your energy on someone else. But a long-winded email of 6 paragraphs that is general and not personalized equals spam. So it's not going to take you anywhere. However, always optimize for warm interest. All that being said, still optimize for warm interest.
Fantastic. Thank you for restoring faith on cold outreach, because I think there's, a misconception on just like that topic. But to your point, the construction of and the design of that message and that email and the structure of words and what you're saying is critically important to be seen in a serious way.
No, I mean, reaching out as a hard tech investor to a consumer SaaS, as a hard tech founder to a consumer SaaS investor, just shows that you have taken absolutely zero interest in this fundraise because you didn't bother to spend 10 seconds on the investor's website.
Yeah, that's definitely the inverse of an empowered approach, right? Is like, you value your own time first. Don't dilute your brand, your company name, you as an individual by doing outreach that's not aligned. I think there's too many tools available for that to still be the case. So
absolutely,
yeah, we definitely,
and don't risk actually getting marked to spam, like for real, by the email client. That set you back your fundraise quite some time. If your deliverability rate is like now 50% and your emails are not even being sent to investors, don't do that. And that's an easy pitfall to fall into.
Absolutely.
I think we have time for one question. I know if we all had a crystal ball, we would be in a very different place. But do you have any predictions, or do you see any trends in the fundraising landscape for 2024? And, if those challenges are to arise, how can founders best prepare themselves?
Good question. A tricky question.
I know.
I stopped trying to do predictions. I'm happy Daniela did not read the book yet. Do not read the last chapter on co-working. I was tempted to do predictions in that one and failed miserably now looking backwards. So read the first chapters, not that one. But if I were to give my best guess, let's not call it a prediction, for 2024, would be, if we don't accidentally or willfully fall into either a significant economic downturn and or a third world war, which the likelihood of it happening is higher than ever been before, I see valuations slowly coming back to normal and more founders emerging out of this like very weird end of 2022, 2023 cycle where people got scared. People realized that the 2020 and 2021 frenzy was not there to last. At some point, the music stops. And then everybody started saying, we're not going to deploy too much capital. We're going to be highly selective, which in a way it's a pendulum, right? So like, we're never going to have, a proper middle ground in anything, right? Politics, society, fundraising. As humans, we tend to go from one extreme to another. But I hope that, 2024 is going to be, the pendulum slowly swinging back towards some more founder power and founder empowerment in a way in the fundraising ecosystem before we get into another bubble and then we just go back and back again as if we never learn our lessons. So 2024 in theory should be an easier year to raise, with the biggest caveat, the world not going okay, this is a PC. The world not going down, to use a appropriate kid-friendly term. Yeah.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, I do so as well.
Through this.
Absolutely. I do very much hope as well. And I do believe that there's an incredible future laying in front of us as a human society, and the ability for us to harness the latest technologies for good is higher than ever. But at the same time, our chance of falling in the wrong direction and leveraging the same technologies for destruction and hate and propagate discrimination and leverage things like social media for the wrong things has the highest risk that I ever had. So we're in an unstable part of our human society, and we believe technology is the agent for change, but only if done properly and by the right people. And venture capital can be that catalyst for that type of change, because their job is to back founders who can truly move the needle. And that should be inspiring for some. And, for some, like, I don't want to change the world. It's okay. Maybe the founder journey is not really, what you should do.
Yeah. Got to keep it real and as optimistic as possible. I read Andreessen's Techno Optimist Manifesto.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. And I think there's a lot of key points in there with technology for good. And as society, like, we have to be part of the change and what we're, the evolution of our purpose and presence here to be for good. So
absolutely
appreciate your insights, Vlad. Thank you so much for being with us today. And we will follow up with a recap of so many great tips that you've provided to the community here. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Daniela. Thank you, Ali. It was a pleasure to be here.
Take care.
Take care.